One of my favorite spiritual teachers is a Zen master. His name is Jakusho Kwong Roshi. Um, he was one of the first disciples of Suzuki Roshi, who was the Japanese Zen master who founded the San Francisco Zen Center, where I practiced in the early years when I was in my 20s, many years ago. And he still has a place, Kwong Roshi, in Sonoma County, Northern California. In his book, No Beginning, No End, he has a little section here on doing the thing for itself. And he says, we should work like the rain. The rain just falls. It doesn't ask, am I making a nice sound down below? Or will the plants be glad to see me? Will they be grateful? The rain just falls, one raindrop after another. Millions and billions of raindrops only falling. This is the open secret of Zen. Another phrase of Kwong Roshi's is, Zen is the aliveness that we bring to each moment. So I found as the years goes by, more and more, my spirit of inquiry is kind of moving from trying to define what consciousness is, what we're made out of, and integrating with that spirit of, there's that intellectual curiosity that'll never die, because we think the way our heart beats or our body breathes, our mind thinks. So thought energy is always a big part of us. But there's a moving into, for me, there's a moving into integrating this feeling of aliveness. What is this aliveness? The spirit of aliveness that animates us. And I don't like to overuse phrases, but the one that sort of helps me is from another master, Yogananda, the great Hindu master, where he had a phrase, God is the electricity, human beings are the light bulbs. So for me, that's a very concrete and easily understandable metaphor, I get kind of confused when masters talk about Buddha nature or the absolute, but the aliveness, the aliveness that we are, can be easily kind of point us towards our actual experience of being a human being. If we think of in that term of the life force moving, the aliveness we bring to each moment. So there's a Zen story related to this that I was working on with a student recently. And the famous Zen master is approached by a monk, and Zen master is fanning himself. And so the monk asks, he says, Master, the nature of the wind is permanent, and there is nowhere that it doesn't reach, so why do you feel like you need to fan yourself? And the master replies, although you realize that the nature of the wind is permanent, you don't understand the meaning of it reaching everywhere. And so the monk asks, what is the meaning of it reaching everywhere? And so the master just continues to fan himself. And then the monk bows. He gets it. So, what is the nature of the wind? I think of the nature of the wind as, it's a metaphor for the aliveness, the life force that's animating us, that's moving through us as an expression of us, as an expression of our life. And so when the master continues to fan himself, that's his expression of it reaching everywhere. It reaches so far, into our actual being that the energy of the wind and the energy of the life force are the same thing. It's all part of our consciousness. The wind is never there. If we're not present, there's no wind. There has to be consciousness of being present, the awareness of being present for the wind to be there. So the wind is an expression of our energy, our life energy. So he's saying the meaning of it reaching everywhere is it reaches into us, through us, totally saturating us, this life force of the wind, this life force of life of which wind is one expression, totally saturates us. So when he's fanning himself, he's expressing it reaching the innermost depths of our being. The wind, the energy of the wind is what is actually fanning. There's no separate self here fanning. In other words, this life force gives rise to the idea that we are some type of separate being. But those ideas are just passing show. The wind can blow it all away. Kwong Roshi has another phrase called breath sweeps mind. So we could say that our breath and the breath of the wind are not two. Right? So inside and outside are not two. They're not separate. But our thinking mind is always giving us all these, at least in our culture and our conditioning, we try to answer these deep questions like, well, what does it mean? What is the absolute? How do I find the absolute? How do I stay with the absolute? So we try to grasp the absolute with our discriminating consciousness. And we get frustrated because we can't do it through discriminating consciousness, through our thought energy, through our energy of trying to define things, separate things, confine things, control things. So it's really important in our practice to take our stand as awareness itself, just the presence of what we are, of what's actually here. And as we spend many years investigating this here and now, not just through our thinking, but through our feeling of aliveness, and being willing to be still and really deeply contemplate what is the truth of this aliveness, of this being, of this consciousness. So we need to have compassion for ourselves, patience, generosity, with our trying to grasp things, with our trying to grasp the absolute through our thinking mind, through our discriminating consciousness. So we learn, spiritual practice, contemplative practice is the practice of giving. It's a practice of acceptance, unconditional acceptance of ourselves. So we have to learn to be patient with our attachments, with our feelings, with our suffering. And I think that sometimes even if we've been doing this for many years, I've been looking at a book by one of my first teachers, Reb Anderson. It's a book about the 6 paramitas in Buddhist practice. And the practice of generosity and the practice of patience are two of the main ones that I'm still working on. And somehow it felt like something new when he started talking about being patient with our own attachments, with our own suffering, with our own trying to control things. And it's so easy for us to kind of lose awareness of that we're still doing that, or that we just kind of lapse into it, into doing it again and again. And if we really learn to be still, or be willing to just welcome what comes. He talks about not trying to touch or to turn away from our experience, whatever that experience may be. Another saying of his is, whatever comes up, try saying, "Thank you very much, I have no complaints." That's a very powerful practice. And we notice how we resist that. We notice how we want things to be a certain way, how we want to control things. But at the same time, we can go, oh, okay, that's all right. You know, we can welcome that feeling of resistance, welcome that feeling of dissatisfaction, that feeling of frustration. We can let it come in, you know, it's okay. And I've been doing that, I've been practicing on that for the last couple months, specifically, and it's really helped. There is a little bit more suffering because I'm not turning away from it, and I'm not distracting myself from it as much. So there's a little more suffering, but at the same time, there's a sort of softening around it. And I was watching a movie of a mother, you know, when your kid's at the beach and the kids are there and they're building their sandcastles and they're having a great time building their sandcastles. And the mother's just watching, you know, and then the waves come and the sandcastle gets blown away and dissolving and the kids get excited. And the mother's so compassionate, you know, she's totally committed, totally wanting to be one with her kids and wanting to comfort them from their, you know, from the suffering of losing their sandcastles and all. But she's not attached at all to the sandcastles, right? So the presence that we are, our true nature, it's not attached to what the particulars of our experience are, the objects of our suffering, you know, of our clinging. But to our actual being, there's a total commitment. There's a total commitment to the truth of our being. So gradually we learn that if we cultivate this generosity and patience with our own suffering and our own frustration at not being able to achieve enlightenment, not being able to go beyond suffering, eventually we kind of let it come in, let the suffering come in. We can kind of welcome it. We don't have to try to control it. We can kind of relax our separateness, our sense of contraction, our sense of wanting to separate ourselves from others. We learn to make use of our suffering, better use of our suffering. We can gradually learn to transform it. That the Buddha, you know, had a saying in the Lotus Sutra, eyes of compassion, observing beings, bestow an ocean of blessing beyond measure. We can actually feel that blessing in the acceptance of suffering and seeing how it transforms itself with that acceptance. We join the unconditional acceptance and love and compassion of our true nature, of infinite consciousness.